Well, I grew up in Louisiana. I'm from old stock Americans. We're like the original people who settled the state of North Carolina. So we have a long history in this country of displacing Native Americans, enslaving African Americans, all the other things that Americans did. We sort of celebrate ourselves as heroes if we've been here a long time, but a lot of the reality is if you've been here a lot of time, your ancestors have a lot of blood on their hands. So I'm a historian, I'm aware of this, I've looked into my own family history. I went to Davidson College in North Carolina. I majored in Middle East Studies. I went to Palestine when I was, after my freshman year in college, with a church group, and I stayed in Nasra with a Palestinian family, and that's what got me interested in the Middle East. So I spent my junior year in Cairo, graduated, went to Washington, D.C. and worked for a year for an Arab American organization, and then I got married to someone who was in graduate school here at Michigan, and I moved to Michigan, and the people in Washington knew about Access, and they told Ish about me, and so when I came to Michigan, I went and talked to Ish, and I got hired to start the arts program at Access. So I was the cultural arts director there. Part of what excited me about the community here wasn't the Arabness of the community, it was the working class nature of the community. Where I grew up, we didn't really have a strong working class. So I worked in the south end of Dearborn right by the Rouge plant, and I just became so interested in local history. And eventually I went back and I got my PhD from the University of Michigan. And I have 3 books, and I'm working on a 4th book, Arab Detroit After 9/11. That book is based on a survey that the University of Michigan did in 2003. It was like the first big survey of the Arab American community. It was called the Detroit Arab American Study. And so that book is really just an analysis of the data that we had in the survey. I also went beyond the survey and went out and talked to people and sort of wrote about the war on terror and how it was affecting the community. I gave background to what the survey was telling us. And then the second book is called Arab Detroit 9/11, Life in the Terror Decade. Okay. And it was written 10 years later, 10 years after 9/11. And the idea is that my husband, Andrew Shryock, and Nabil Abraham, who used to teach at Henry Ford Community College, had done a book in 2000 called Arab Detroit From Margin to Mainstream. And they wanted to see how the whole war on terror had changed the community in that 10-year period. And then my 3rd book, which is really my book, it's a monograph, it's one I did by myself, which is based on my dissertation research, is called Old Islam in Detroit, Reimagining the Muslim American Past. I knew the Arab community really well, but I didn't know the Muslim community very well. And I thought it was sort of my obligation to try and understand what was going on with the Muslim community better. And all of its diversity, not just the Arab Muslims, but all the Muslims. And the thing I realized really quickly was that there wasn't a history. Like every congregation had sort of a little bit of a history, but no one had a big history. And most of the congregations, they were self-made congregations, So their narratives were kind of, when we got here, there was nothing here before. We created it for ourselves. And they did create it for themselves, but there was something here before. So I got really interested in why, you would think that after 9/11 it would be really important for the Muslim community to be able to establish itself as historically part of Michigan. So I think that the Arab community has always been diverse, and it's always been very aware of its differences. Definitely in times of conflict that becomes more, so during the Lebanese Civil War, it used to be that the Christian Arabs and the Muslim Arabs kind of did a lot of things together. They had the film series at the DIA. They collaborated, but after, during the Civil War, they kind of separated a little bit. Right now, we see a separation between the Lebanese who are supporting, Assad, and almost everybody else in Dearborn who are not. So I mean, events overseas definitely drive this investment in difference. But the Yemeni community here has a really distinctive history. So in the first place, most of the Yemenis who were here in the 60s and 70s were men. You didn't have a lot of families here. It was mostly people who came here and they worked in the auto industry, or they worked in the Coney Islands, or wherever they worked, on the Great Lakes. And they sent money and supported families back in Yemen. So the Yemeni community it wasn't a community in the same way that the Lebanese were with their big families, or the Palestinians were with their big families, or after the 1990s, the Iraqis were. Now we've got this incredible growth of the Yemeni community. And Al-Qaeda does have a stronghold in Yemen, right? The US government is fighting one of its biggest drone wars in Yemen, right? So Yemenis are associated, whether they want to be or not, whether it's real for the people who are here or not, they're associated with Al-Qaeda. And we know that the state is very interested in the Yemeni community. We know that your mosques have been spied on by the FBI and other agencies. We know that people in the Yemeni community have been harassed. I mean, travel back and forth between the US and Yemen is difficult. Now there's a travel ban which targets Yemen really specifically, okay? So yes, there is this issue. And then there's also internal racism in the Arab community. You know, the Yemenis are the darkest skin group, or they were the poorest group, or for whatever reason. So I'm married to an anthropologist, Andrew Shryock, and his initial intention was to do his dissertation research in Yemen. So we went to Yemen on our honeymoon. We went up and stayed up in Murad, up in that area, and we stayed in the Magad, or the Diwan, of this big sheikh. And so that was our honeymoon. You know, there were like all these guys there with their machine guns chewing gat until the middle of the night and playing cards, and then they would go home and we would sleep over in a corner. You know, not a traditional honeymoon. So I look forward to a time when we go back to Yemen and it's a peaceful country. So I am the director of the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. And we do a lot of things in service of the Arab community and in service of our students and to try and educate the public about the Arab community. The most important thing we do is teach classes. So we have a minor in Arab American Studies that we're offering, and we also have a certificate in Arab American Studies. And I teach, you know, the history of Islam in America. I teach Introduction to Arab American Studies. I teach Middle Eastern diasporas in the West. Next year, my project for next winter, I want to look at the history of the Yemeni community here. And so I need a lot of Yemeni students to take the class. I am interested because I know that there's this history of Yemeni Americans working on the Great Lakes, working in Great Lakes shipping. And no one's written about that. It's like I keep talking to people and they're like, yeah, my dad was a cook. Yeah, my dad worked in the engine rooms, you know. Well, our exhibit will help answer that, right? We're going to help give you some, you know, not give you history, your history is there, but we're going to help tell your story to the larger community. And what my interest is in the Great Lakes, okay? That's what got me started on this project. I'm so interested in Yemeni Americans on the Great Lakes. It's such an American story and it hasn't been told, right?